happy to be joined by Judge Susan Crawford of Dane County, candidate for a soon-to-be open seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Judge Crawford, good morning. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show, Pat.
Yeah, it's nice to have you back. We spoke in September, which, again, people were really not thinking about the Supreme Court race yet, but clearly both you and your opponent still had to raise funds, still build name ID and everything. So from September till now, you probably feel a lot better known and probably a lot better scrutinized.
Yeah, we have been getting out all over the state in the last 6 months and talking to a lot of voters and getting people energized about this race, making sure that people know who I am and why I'm in the race and what I'm bringing to it. And I think that we are feeling really good about where we are right now. Have done a great job in getting the resources that we need to run the campaign that we've got to run here. And so, yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident.
Well, we talked about this in September that you were well aware that you were probably going to blow the barn doors off of any previous records for fundraising for a state Supreme Court race. It does not appear to have daunted you too much based on your latest numbers. They seem pretty impressive.
Right. We, I think, have set a record, and I have a great campaign team. As a judge, I am not the one who is making those asks. I'm not asking anybody to make a contribution because the Judicial Code does not allow that, and I'm really scrupulous in following that rule. But I have a great campaign team who is making sure that we've got the resources that we need to run this race and help voters to understand that I will be a fair, impartial justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, that I'll be protecting their rights and looking out for them.
It was only a week ago that we were marking the 4th anniversary of the January 6th insurrection. We had Ruth Kana from the Wisconsin Examiner on last week, Thursday, to talk about her editorial column, raising eyebrows about what former Attorney General and Waukesha County Judge Brad Schimel had to say about the January 6th defendants and not getting a fair shake in court in D.C., even though that's what typically happens. You get, tried in the places where alleged crimes are being convicted. I wondered if comments like that surprise you about, whether people accused of a violent insurrection deserve some kind of special treatment when it comes to picking the jurisdiction of their court.
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't surprised to hear Judge Schimel making those kinds of comments. It really is par for the course for him. He's running a really extreme partisan campaign. And I think that he had a target audience for those comments that he was trying to reach. It is a little bit surprising, I would say, for a former attorney general and former district attorney, as he is, to be defending violent people who stormed our nation's capital and attacked law enforcement officers in the Capitol. I think it sends a strong message to the voters about what Judge Schimel stands for. And, it's a shame, really, that we have a sitting judge in the state of Wisconsin that would be making those kinds of attacks, not just against law enforcement officers, but also against the jury system, which is the cornerstone of the American system of justice. And in my courtroom, we don't have any litmus test for serving on a jury. And we get jurors from across the political spectrum. My experience is that they all do their jobs as jurors. They listen to the evidence, they apply the law, and they work together to arrive at a fair verdict in every case. And I always thank every juror who sits on a jury in my courtroom.
It just seems to echo, what you would call the Trumpist rhetoric of, attacking the courts as the president-elect did about being tried in New York, even though that, again, is where the trial would normally be held. Another part of that, Trumpian rhetoric is right on Judge Schimel's campaign page with the line, "From opening the border to releasing criminals on our streets, rogue judges across the nation are putting their radical agenda above the law. Brad Schimel will take back the Wisconsin Supreme Court and end the madness." Can you give me your impression when you hear a phrase like rogue judges being used when, your colleagues are out there trying to apply the law as fairly as possible?
Yeah, Yeah, I don't know any of those rogue justices or judges in Wisconsin. All the judges that I know work really hard to make sure they're doing justice in their courtrooms every day. They're trying to get the facts right and apply the law and get to a fair result. That certainly is what I do in my courtroom every day. And that, I think, is what voters expect judges and the justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court to do. I think that kind of rhetoric is another example of Brad Schimel's extreme partisanship. And, he is running to bring a partisan agenda to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He is not running to be a fair and impartial judge. And that's really the difference between the two of us.
And yet, if the law and order themes that we often hear in Supreme Court races and races for Attorney General, if that's out there, what will not be at issue here is your experience on that, because before you were working in the Doyle administration, before you were working in private practice, you were working as a criminal prosecutor. So you no doubt have already had to tell people that you know a thing or two about prosecuting felony cases.
Absolutely. I started out my legal career in Wisconsin at the Wisconsin Department of Justice. I was a prosecutor, both in the trial court, so I prosecuted white collar crime and abuses against vulnerable people living in nursing homes. And then I also prosecuted felony cases in front of our Wisconsin Supreme Court. I first argued a case in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court back in 1998, making sure that our communities were kept safe and that folks who had harmed their community or harmed a crime victim were, kept in prison, that they were not able to overturn their convictions on a legal technicality, and that we were all kept safe. So that is an important part of my career, work that I'm really proud of, and an important part of my record.
You also then, not long after that, served in the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, chief of staff to the secretary. And so what extra attributes do you think that brings as a potential Supreme Court justice who has really seen how the corrections department operates, how the prisons operate throughout the entire state?
Right. I've experienced and participated in our criminal justice system from a number of different angles or sides at this point, both as a prosecutor, then when I was helping lead the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, making sure that our communities were safe, particularly as offenders were being released from prison, making sure that they were being supervised appropriately. Part of that is also making sure that services are available to them. So if somebody's got a substance abuse problem that's driving their criminal behavior, to make sure that they have access to treatment resources when they're coming back into the community. Because just about everybody who goes into the prison system is going to come out again. And we were really focused on that reentry process to make sure that we were doing everything that we could to protect public safety for those folks coming out. And then, of course, as a judge, I've presided over criminal cases. I've not hesitated to send someone to prison or jail when that's what's necessary to protect public safety. And sometimes that's what you got to do. And I've always been willing to do that and put public safety at the forefront as I've made decisions.
When you worked for the Department of Natural Resources and headed up the Division of Enforcement, this by and large, as you told me in September, involves some serious violations of environmental law. It's about the water, the air, other natural resources. And yet I sense, and this is the part that I fear will sound flippant, I wonder about a campaign where we're suddenly going to hear that Judge Crawford did more to protect the species of butterfly than, allowing us to open an iron ore mine or something. I wonder if in your time at the Department of Natural Resources working on environmental law, Are we going to hear things from the Schimel campaign or outside interests that they're trying to nitpick whatever they can find about your record?
Right. Well, I don't think they're going to find any cases where we were prosecuting people for not protecting butterflies at that time. But natural resources protection is important. I'll just say that Wisconsin is blessed with abundant and beautiful natural resources that deserve protection, and the legislature has passed laws to protect our clean air and water and our natural resources. And the executive branch has a responsibility for enforcing those laws. I think what we've seen so far from Judge Schimel's campaign is that when they can't find something, they'll make it up, unfortunately. They are pretty fast and loose with the facts, and I would not be surprised if they attacked my record on environmental enforcement, not based on something that we actually did to enforce the laws at that time, but something that is just made up. And I'd like to offer also the contrast that when Brad Schimel was the Attorney General, he was allowing polluters, big global companies like 3M, who were violating air pollution laws, not having the proper controls on their factories. He was letting them off with less than a slap on the wrist, saying that as long as they upgraded their controls, that they wouldn't even have to pay a fine. And what that means is that polluters just got away with it. Big corporations pollute, they know exactly what they're supposed to do, and they do less than that to increase their bottom lines, to increase their profits. So unfortunately, under Brad Schimel as Attorney General, polluters got away with it. And I'm afraid that is the record that he brings to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Yes, it was part of leading a lawsuit that opposed EPA limits on carbon emissions. And I think another issue that's liable to come up is the way that he led a 20-state lawsuit, I believe it was, looking to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And he noted that as much in his defeat back in 2018, that he blamed part of his loss on how people felt about having pre-existing conditions covered. And in my mind, that comes back to what you've talked about earlier in terms of your own personal values about healthcare decisions, about the right to vote, about democracy, that really you seem to be focused more on protecting or expanding rights rather than looking for ways to limit people's choices about their health or their livelihood.
Right. Pat, I have worked hard throughout my career to protect the rights of Wisconsinites under our laws and under our Constitution. I do that as a judge every day. I worked in both private practice as a lawyer and when I was working for the government as a lawyer to make sure that I was doing everything that I could to protect the rights of ordinary Wisconsinites. My opponent has exactly the opposite record. You referred to the lawsuit that he joined as Attorney General that would have resulted in, if it had been successful, in tens of thousands of Wisconsinites losing access to their health care. He did the same thing when it came to reproductive health care rights for women. Has a long history of attacking and trying to take away access to reproductive health care for women. I, on the other hand, worked hard when I was in private practice to make sure that doctors who provide reproductive health care to women could continue to provide those services without having to be afraid of losing their medical licenses or even being prosecuted with felonies for providing health care to women. So I think that is a big point of contrast. And, I view the law as a tool to protect people, to protect their rights. And that's the perspective I'm bringing to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And I will always use common sense, look at the purposes of the law, look at what it was intended to protect, and making sure that I am putting people at the forefront of my legal decisions and protecting them.
And before we forget, you did come into this race with 4 rather noteworthy endorsements. The entire current progressive majority justices, Ann Walsh Bradley, who is departing this seat, Janet Protasewicz, Rebecca Dallett, Jill Karofsky. Not a bad way to get a campaign launched, along with all the other support that has come since that time. For Judge Susan Crawford, Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate. Judge, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Pat. It really was a pleasure.